The deaths of 5 journalists in an Israeli attack on a hospital in Gaza this week highlight the dangers facing media workers covering the war. The Committee to Protect Journalists says 189 Palestinian journalists have been killed in the territory since hostilities began. No such killings have been documented in the occupied West Bank, but reporters there are also at risk, as DW correspondent Fanny Facsar and her team found out in Ramallah.
Before heading out to film, Issam Rimawi goes through his usual routine of checking his gear. His assignment: to cover a protest by families of Palestinians held in Israeli prisons. He's extra diligent, because since October 7, 2023, he says, the risks of being a Palestinian cameraman have dramatically increased.
Now, when I leave home, I never know whether I will come back to my wife, to my kids, to my family. Before the 7th of October, when I covered events, I would go without fear. I wouldn't be scared to go into the middle of a confrontation. But now they're threatening to shoot at us.
In addition to Issam, we had arranged to speak with another journalist to talk about his work, Muath Amarne. But shortly before we were due to meet him, Muath was detained by Israeli authorities, like many other journalists in the occupied West Bank.
He was arrested twice since October 7th without any charge. It is administrative detention. We're in solidarity with him.
Administrative detention means no charge, no trial. Our conversation is cut short. A man on the street informs us that the Israeli military is raiding the city center.
There are 6 cars and another 6 to protect them. They're shooting.
We are on the way to cover a protest. In the meantime, we're hearing that the Israeli military is raiding Ramallah. We are hearing massive explosions. And this is the point where not only we do need to put our flak jackets on, but also we need to coordinate very, very well to stay safe. This is nearly a daily situation, Issam tells me. Yes. The protest Issam planned to cover is no longer the story. Safety first, he says. But staying safe here is anything but simple.
Here it's dangerous. Stay left.
And then the Israeli military points their gun at us.
He's threatening us that he will shoot live ammunition and tear gas to keep us away from the area. He's shooting at us directly with tear gas.
They're shooting tear gas. They're shooting towards journalists. How do you feel about this?
They fear the camera because of the crimes we are showing the world. That's why they target us and our cameras.
Here.
Even before the current war, Issam says he experienced intimidation by Israeli security forces. In May this year, he was attacked by Israeli settlers. Palestinians in the occupied West Bank rely on journalists like Issam to share their experiences of living under Israeli occupation, but reporting on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict isn't just challenging, it's dangerous. Both local and international journalists face real threats on the ground. Many of us have been harassed by Israeli settlers or intimidated by Israeli police and security forces while covering stories here in the occupied West Bank. Just recently, settlers attacked some of my colleagues. They escaped unharmed, but their car was damaged. Israel wants to silence journalists, claims journalist Shuruk Assad. She says she's covered the conflict for 3 decades, but when the Gaza war began, everything escalated.
Escalation says Israel decided from 7th of October to make journalists as a target. They don't want another narrative. Second, they don't want any witnesses. They want to spread fear because they want anybody to think twice because they will decide to be a journalist. They want as much as possible to stop them from work, to be threatened, to be afraid, to be not protected, to be traumatized. This is what Israel wants.
Whatever Israel's intention, Issam says he wants to continue his work even if it means being detained or killed.
The flak jacket, the helmet, at least shows that we are press, journalists. This should give us a little bit of protection. But there's no safety.
Israel says it doesn't target journalists as such, but in this conflict, the statistics and experiences like today show many of us don't feel protected when doing our work.
And we're back with Fanny Facsar in Jerusalem. Fanny, we saw in your report there how dangerous it is for local and foreign journalists like you and your team to do your jobs. Tell us more about the challenges that journalists face there, just trying to do the work that they're meant to do.
West Bank also told us that, of course, there are also financial challenges because several media outlets have been shut down during the course of the ongoing Gaza war. But there's also limits to what you want to post actually on social media right now. Various journalists told us they don't want to self-censor themselves, but they actually are extra careful right now what they're going to share on social media, how they're going to express themselves on social media, so they're not detained, so they can at least continue on in the field and keep reporting. So we're speaking here about people who are deeply devoted to this commitment of being a journalist, and that is sharing a narrative that they feel is very, very much underrepresented, that is the narrative of people who are living under Israeli occupation in the occupied West Bank. So journalists are sharing that they feel it's not only underrepresented locally, regionally, because media outlets are closing down or have shut down, but also internationally, because depending on where foreign correspondents go to, there's also a question just how much they can amplify the voices of local Palestinians, given the risks that everybody is facing right now, but certainly local journalists even more so at the degree that they live here. So they can't simply just leave. They do not have the privilege, like so many of us who are here temporarily, who can simply leave. And then, of course, there's the mental health situation, which also is a factor. Just to imagine, to work in this limbo, you go out in the field, you go out into the field, you do not know whether you will come back alive. You do not know whether you will be detained and will not see your family for several months or even years.
We'll have to leave it there, but thank you so much, Fanny. That's DW's senior international correspondent, Fanny Facsar.
And for more now, I'm joined by Scott Griffen. He's executive director of the International Press Institute in Vienna. Scott, it's good to have you with us. You've called the conflict in Gaza the deadliest for journalists in modern history. What protection should be in place for journalists reporting from conflict zones?
The same protections that we would want to see in any conflict zone, which is that journalists are civilians under international law, and they need to be treated as civilians. Journalists are never legitimate targets in a conflict. And what is also critical is that if journalists are targeted, then there needs to be accountability for those responsible, which is exactly what we haven't seen in this war so far.
Yeah, speaking of accountability, after the recent attack on Nasser Hospital, Israel promised an investigation. Is there any indication that has gone ahead?
We don't know the details of any possible investigation. We've heard what you have heard, but what we do know is that Israel has a long history of, in some cases, targeting journalists, in other cases in which journalists have been killed by the IDF. And a long history of not properly investigating those incidents. And that goes back to cases in the West Bank, including the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh several years ago before this conflict. So I think any such claim by the military, by the Israeli military, needs to be taken with a huge degree of skepticism. Investigations are great. What we need is accountability and responsibility. And for that, we also need pressure from other states that are allies of Israel to ensure that international law is upheld and that journalists are protected as civilians.
Israel claims that it does not target journalists as such. It said that Anas al-Sharif of Al Jazeera, who, as you know, was killed in a targeted Israeli attack earlier this month, Israel says that he was affiliated with Hamas. What's your response to that?
I think our response to that is that the evidence that we've seen so far that has been made public is not sufficient, is not clear for such a claim, and certainly for the targeting of someone like Anas al-Sharif, who is a journalist working for Al Jazeera for many years. And what's been really disturbing, in fact, is the way in which, in several cases, journalists have been the target of what appears to be, in some cases, a smear campaign trying to portray them as affiliated with Hamas or otherwise engaged in combat activity or terrorist activity, and then ended up being killed. So I think there's a really disturbing pattern going on here. And again, we've seen now, as you mentioned, the figure close to 200 journalists killed in this conflict, including several who have been directly targeted. And we are not seeing investigations in these cases, and we are not seeing accountability in these cases. So this is, I think, goes to the heart of the issue here. Again, we want the rule of law to be upheld, and we want the killing of journalists to stop.
Recent events have, of course, put focus on Gaza, but what can you tell us about the challenges for local and foreign journalists working in the West Bank?
I just want to say something briefly about Gaza, which is that in addition to calling for an end to the killing of journalists, we need Israel to open up Gaza for international journalists. Local journalists have been bearing the burden of covering this war, and it's thanks to them that we know about what is happening on the ground, including the humanitarian crisis and the impact on civilians in Gaza. So that is number one. In terms of the West Bank, this is also something that is not new. Israel has been putting pressure on journalists in the West Bank for many years, predating this conflict. I already mentioned the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh, as well as the pressure, raids, closure of Al Jazeera bureaus in the West Bank. So this is not something that is not new. And certainly we are concerned that the pressure that is already on journalists in Gaza is growing in the West Bank, just at a moment where the international community needs to see what is happening in the West Bank and other parts of the occupied territories.
Before we run out of time, the notion of accountability, what should the international community be doing to ensure justice and accountability?
They need to be putting pressure on Israel. They need to be putting pressure on the IDF and the government to stop the killing of journalists. And I think that is where we see as the most important path forward. And for us as a press freedom defense organization, in addition to how horrific this has been for the journalists in Gaza, we need to understand that this is something that also has global consequences for journalists everywhere. You see military authorities killing journalists, in some cases targeting journalists. That has an impact globally. That tells us that journalists can be targeted. And we need to stop this here in this conflict, and states need to understand that this is a message that will spread. And so we need real effective pressure on Israel by states that are allied with Israel to put a stop to this and really make clear that journalists are never targets, whether that is in Gaza or anywhere else.
Scott Griffen, Executive Director of the International Press Institute. Scott, we appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.